Hi, everyone. My name is Beattie, and I'm an Agile coach and DevOps transformation innovation lead at Agile by Design. I'm also a proud stream owner of the ACE community and a member of the steering committee here at ACE. And ACE is a community of machine learning practitioners and researchers who have gathered, 3 to 5 times a week. I'm just going to change my camera here so that I'm a little bit more visible. Times a week to produce premium content in various subject areas. And I'd like you guys to all, take a second now just to type in AI.science into your browser, and you're going to be able to see the whole bunch of great content there. There's also some new subscription options for you to access some premium content, and really bring your game up to speed in the AI world, actually. Also, make sure to click subscribe on the YouTube channel here, and that way you're going to get notified about all the live sessions we've got going on and the free content we publish on a regular basis. Currently, I think there are 14 different streams that are focused on different ML topics, and this one specifically today is focused in the AI and product stream. So it's more facing the AI and how it integrates within a product stream and into a business. And that's why today's conversation is going to be pretty awesome. So we're here to chat today with Ramey. Ramey, he is a senior managing consultant and thought leader on computer vision at IBM Canada. And he leads large teams and complex programs that build and embed AI solutions into client enterprise operations. His role revolves around understanding clients' business environments and requirements and bringing AI and computer vision expertise into play, managing delivery teams, and managing the business side of building robust AI solutions. So this is someone that's really going to be helping us shed some light on how to operationalize AI at scale. So this is, once again, as part of the product stream, a view from more of the business side of things. So obviously there's a lot of technology under the hood of AI, but in this case here, we're going to hear some more about some success factors for implementing AI at the enterprise scale. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So with that, I'll throw it over to you, Ramey, just to kick us off with, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm very excited to be with you, and thank you for having me. As you said, today I'm going to be talking about 8 different success factors for implementing AI at enterprise scale. And we'll get right into it with a little bit more on my background. So as you mentioned, I'm a senior manager at IBM Canada. My experience at IBM has been more in the capacity of a product manager through various engagements and sales efforts with different clients in different industries. And I've been fortunate to learn through a series of experiences where I led clients going through, the whole type of AI, going through building proofs of concept, building out pilots, and right now building out full-scale projects that are expected to bring business value to our clients and transform the way that they do business. Right now, I'm leading a large, first-of-a-kind, large-scale AI vision project with a client. I'm not going to say exactly what the name of the client is, but it is one of those projects that is going to be deployed at the edge, and it is going to be integrated into their processes. And when I say large, I'm talking about many use cases. We're talking about 100+ use cases and a very large team of more than 50 people and growing. It's a team that's comprised of data scientists, analysts, machine learning engineers, architects, people like myself, and of course, engaging with the subject matter experts on the client side. So it's been very rewarding to have been kind of dabbling in NLP, dabbling in advanced analytics, dabbling with computer vision, and I chose computer vision as the stream that I'm going deep into. And so my goal today is to bring that learning to the audience. It's all about, from a business perspective, how do you run an AI project, and what are some of the success factors that underpin that success and underpin ongoing projects that are risk managed. As you know, the AI is an area where there's been lots going on. There's lots of information out there, and everybody is kind of figuring out. And so am I, by the way. I'm still figuring it out. I've been fortunate to have these experiences of implementing real AI in real business operations, and that's what I'm about to talk about today. All right, we'll dive right in. So the first one I want to talk about is something that you don't always hear when it comes to AI implementations, and this is committed executive sponsorship. As I mentioned before, building AI in business is not something that's been done time and time again with lots of different references and lots of different examples to learn from and reference. And so realizing that, but also putting into the picture the fact that when you initiate a software development project, or really any project, there has to be a return on investment. And so, and that's why this is number one, right? Your project is not really going to kick off at that scale unless there is a set of well-defined and forecasted cost and business value parameters that are understood pretty well within the organization and the team that you're working with. And so it's hugely important, and it's hugely important because from my experience, it's really the bloodline of a project. As soon as there is risk to the forecasted ROI, people start freaking out a little bit and started asking questions. And there's always, believe it or not, there's always the promoters of AI and innovation and the people who are skeptical, right? So there's always that bit of background discussion around, is this really going to work, right? And that's the type of thing that actually keeps me excited, because it's kind of keeps me on my toes, and that's the kind of work that I like to do. On the subject of innovation and people who are promoters of this type of innovation, the second point under committed executive sponsorship is that ideally you have people supporting you and sponsoring your project who have an innovative mindset and have this willingness to take a little bit of extra risk and willing to place a bet and wanting to be the driving force behind disruptions and coming in with a longer term vision and saying, you know what, yes, this is where I'm going to put my bets. This is where I want to take my business. And as I was doing research throughout my journey and in preparation for this talk, I came across some very interesting quotes from iconic figures in business and in tech. I've chosen not to include their names on there because I'm not. That's not the point I'm trying to make about who they are or who they worked for. But they span, across this idea that people don't necessarily believe in disruptive technology. Whether this is about the value that computers can bring in people's homes, whether it's about doubts that people are going to get sick of watching television and that the television industry is going to die, or something as recent as, and you could probably guess which one this one is, but people really doubting the fact that Netflix is going to be a major player in the entertainment industry. So again, back to the idea of having that long-term vision, being able to imagine the possibilities or the art of the possible, rather, and putting that, bringing that to the table as part of the executive sponsorship for a large-scale AI project. The second success factor that I want to talk about is a robust methodology. And I wrote an article on LinkedIn a couple of weeks back that I encourage the audience to go and check out. And it talks about the methodology that we've built, my team and I, for computer vision. And what it really comes down to is having a methodology, a structure for doing the work, such that you have a foundation for building trust in the process. As a consultant, I can tell you that this is actually a competitive advantage and is something that has allowed us to build credibility and trust with our clients. Coming in with an actually documented playbook for how are you going to approach solving the problems, what kind of rules and steps and inputs and outputs, and what kind of definitions of success you're going to have, actually documented and sought after the input from various different individuals. So whether that's the AI architect, whether that's a product, oriented person like myself, or a business analyst or a data scientist, putting all these thoughts together in a documented fashion, not just acts as a foundation for building trust, but it becomes this set of reusable reference points and anchors that helps you build, not just follow the methodology to build and be successful in the way that you're building, but also building tacit knowledge, right? So we're talking about a methodology which typically you think of, it's more of like I guess you can look at it as a manual, but it's really not. It's a foundation for knowing the basics and knowing what to expect in terms of, risks and issues that you're going to face and different ways to deal with different computer vision problems. But it's also that anchor that you're going to use and refer to, and gives you that common language to speak about the work that you're doing, and then allows you to build intuition, build ability to forecast problems that you might encounter as you do a problem and that sort of thing. And it becomes very important in business to be able to forecast that risk, bring that issue, get the input that you need from others, and drive forward. The other thing I want to say about having a robust methodology is that from what I learned is that you must, and I'll talk about this a little bit in terms of kind of reviewing and modifying and evolving, but you have to expect that whatever you're going to spend, your blood, sweat, and tears building in terms of methodology that is going to guide this large team, you also have to expect that you're going to review it, you're going to modify it over time, because guess what? You're going to learn some new things that you haven't learned before that are coming from the AI space, or new approaches to machine learning, or just the business context. Your understanding of it evolves. The objectives of the project at the business level is going to change, and you've got to always be on your toes and be ready to modify that methodology as you move forward. Okay, the third success factor is very much linked to methodology, because it's very much about that repeatable structure and building trust in a process, building trust in the way that things are done. And what I'm talking about here is a governance structure. And what I mean by that is a well-defined set of processes, cadences, team structures, understanding who's doing what, when, and using what tools, right? And how are we going to be reporting status, and how are we going to be managing risk, right? And how are we going to be able to gauge whether we're behind or forward or just on track? These are all critical things when it comes to building AI at scale, especially giving that confidence for people who are not involved in the AI build itself, right? They're going to look at the project as just another project with, the key tenets of a project. But what you need to do with the methodology and the governance is make sure that it's tailored to the type of work that you're doing, right? So you might have a different kind of method and governance for, computer vision versus NLP versus any other sort of AI project. So you've got to have that. I'm going to be referring to a key ceremony or activity from my experience, which is that use case assessment. The use case assessment is a key thing that we do as we embark on understanding a computer vision problem in an enterprise scenario, and we've built it using everything that we've learned over the last few years as we did these projects, with whether you're looking at an industrial scenario, you're looking at a production process, or you're looking at drawings and trying to extract symbols and things like that. It's one of those things that is really, it's a template, and it reflects all the nuances of what we're building. So when it comes to how do you even begin to define an object of interest that you're trying to get out of an image? How do you outline the risks associated with the different variations that you have, and how do you outline what your targets are for the timeline that you have and the problem that you're trying to solve. We even gonna, assess a use case. And it's been very helpful in, again, building that trust, having that repeatable process and repeatable thing that different people can look at, and as they look at it, it builds their ability to make connections and say, yeah, I've seen that before in the previous use case, and this is different in that way. So it kind of gives you those key elements to draw on, to draw similarities and differences, and even in the way that you articulate risks and things like that. The one thing that I'm fascinated as a person by knowledge management and knowledge transfer between people, and that's something that I'm kind of exploring on my own. And as I was preparing for our discussion, I actually realized that governance and methodology, when I tell you here, hey, before you get started, you gotta think of a governance plan, and you gotta write down a methodology. You might think, hey man, like that's a tedious thing to do. It's not an easy thing. It'll take time, and what's the point, right? And I totally understand that it can be tedious, it can be challenging and intimidating, but I think they're really critical, because they are going to be the foundational elements for people to work together, but also build that framework for explicit to tacit knowledge, and tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge throughout the whole team or the whole organization that you're working within. And I'm referring here to what's called the SECI model for knowledge management and transfer within organizations. And if you think about methodology and governance and what that means when it comes to operationalizing AI on a daily basis, that model becomes very relevant, because it has all these elements of socializing what you're talking about, externalizing it to the people that you're coaching and that you're managing, so that they can actually follow a script to some degree, right? And then they can kind of combine their learnings, which is the combination part, on top of what was already there, and suddenly you're already improving that methodology, improving that governance structure, and then the cycle continues, right? I learned that as sexy and as alluring AI is, when it comes to building real AI infused processes within business, methodology and governance are table stakes.
I love it so far. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. And I'm just going to tell you, the listeners, if you want, post some messages in the chat that you'd like me to pass on to Ramey as we go. I've also just provided the article that you referenced, Ramey, and I've had to read through it a couple times, and it's actually really good capture of how how you're wrapping your organization or your delivery with the right governance and the right asking the right questions to essentially surface the risks and bring forward bring up your chances of likelihood. I find that a lot of people get stuck almost not in the art of the possible or art of the realistic. It's more of like the art of the lucky, because they don't really have this playbook you're talking about. And that's kind of where I want to start something here, which is like, tell me more about this playbook. Tell me more about how it came to be. And obviously it leverages a lot of institutional knowledge, but like, what are the key components of it, and how long has it been around? Like, you can take that in really any direction, but that's something that I think that our listeners and viewers would love to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of its origins, a few years ago, I joined this new team or sub team or practice, if you will, at IBM, and it was during this time where the AI hype was really taking off. And we started doing these, POCs and pilots with different organizations and clients. And at the time, obviously, my knowledge was much less than what I have now. But we were kind of, for a lack of a better word, kind of flying by the seat of our pants, right? So, there's so much knowledge out there, and we're just trying to, prove that this does work, right? And we kept doing these POCs and pilots, which was great, and it was great learning, a great learning opportunity. But what I started realizing, and my team started realizing, is that with every project and every POC that we do, we started to say, hey, remember when we did this other project, or we ran into this one problem and we spent like 3 weeks trying to solve it, and the answer was this? Okay, well, now we know the answer, so we can just get right to that answer right away, right? And so it became this slow realization that, like, okay, our team is going to expand, right? Our team is going to start doing more work, probably more challenging work. So we better start documenting this, right? And so we started doing that, and now it's something that we use to train our people about the whole process of, because it's broken down into about 5 or 6 different parts, right? So the first part is, asking the right questions, right? How do you start, and this is all about computer vision, by the way. So how do you start breaking down the image processing or video processing AI problem so that you uncover the things that you need to uncover sooner rather than later? What are the right questions, right? And then the second part is, okay, so now we understand the problem. We've identified the risks. We understand the objects. We understand, the variations that we have to deal with. Now we come up with a design, right? And it's been sort of a learning process where at the beginning, a few years ago, we come up with a design. We're like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. But then we learn that, rarely does that design ever work right away, right? You've got to start doing the work, and then you learn something, and then you shift the design a little bit to make it work, to get better results, precision, recall, whatever you want, right? And so we started calling it just initial design, because we knew it was initial design, and that's what it was going to be. And most of the time it is. Sometimes we get lucky and the initial design is the final design, but that's not a common occurrence. And then, the steps after that in the methodology is just iterating through the modeling, iterating through, testing. How do you go about changing when you look at an image, it's just a bunch of pixels and unstructured data, right? So part of the methodology is to take that image and transfer at least some of it into structured data, things that I can actually put on a spreadsheet and then analyze and get insight, right? So that was a key part of the methodology, not just to allow us to understand the data better and get intimate with it, but also to allow us to manage things like bias and how often a certain scenario happens. And you can think of, like, when you're working in these industrial type of contexts and you're looking at, a production line or a very big mechanical asset or something, yeah, there's going to be a ton of variations. There's going to be a ton of different things that your AI is going to have to deal with. So that was a very key part of the methodology. And as you go on, it's the multiple iterations of doing that, and then it's the whole idea of, like, okay, you build these models, which may be doing really well, but then you've got to stitch them together, and you actually have to add a bunch of different functions and features of what we call the pipeline, and test that out, right? Because you might suddenly get very different type of results than what you were getting from your individual models. So the methodology talks about how to, this is very high level in the article, but the actual playbook talks about how do you stitch these together, what sort of things you got to look out for, and how do you do this in the most risk managed way, and how do you go about tracking model performance throughout this whole journey. The last couple steps in the methodology is all about hardening what you've built, making sure that you are actually following a software development lifecycle principles. So the stuff that you learn in school or on any other sort of software development project. And the last part of it, or one of the last parts of it, is making sure that it's production ready, right? So making sure that it's as fast as it needs to be, that it's not using, computing power when it shouldn't be, right? So all the different things that are non-AI contexts are the things that you tighten up at the end. And that's pretty much it. Long-winded summary of that method.
It's awesome. So as somebody who's coming from the product side, like how much are you leading the stages here? And how does the team come together around where it's actually at? Just start with that.
Sure. So I am definitely heavily involved at the very front end, from the interface with the client subject matter expert and really understanding their world, right? So often this is an engineer or a mechanical technician or other types of professionals who are explaining things to you in the words that they know and are very relevant to their business. So my job as a product manager is to take that in, understand it, and again, ask those right questions, and then build that use case assessment, share it with my team, and talk about it in ways that are specific enough to make sure that it is not ambiguous, right? Because and we'll get to communicating effectively as one of the other success factors, but one of the key things underpinning my role is being able to communicate the requirements so that they're actually executable, and so that you actually are directing the work to come out with a very specific outcome, right? So all those things have to be communicated by me as a product manager very effectively. Where my role will start to decrease a little bit is the actual building process. So when you talk about labeling, when you talk about testing results, and doing all the unit testing and functional testing and all that kind of stuff, is the work of the actual development team that is assigned that use case. So I kind of keep tabs. I help them through answering questions and maybe some new discoveries that come about during the development, and I coach and I guide there. And in some instances, we go back to our client and we have our little workshops and try to work through these things. And then ultimately, as a product manager, I'm responsible for making sure that what we have built is actually reflective of the requirements and what we have all agreed is going to be the outcome. So whether that's deliverables, whether that's metrics, whether that's even sometimes articulating very clearly where we've gotten, whether we need more time, and if we need more time, then why, and what do you hope to achieve, and things of that nature.
I definitely have way more questions, but why don't we keep going with the presentation, and maybe
Sure.
I'll loop these in as we keep going.
Okay, sounds good. All right. The fourth of 8 success factors is building a strong team, a team that has a conscientious mindset. And what I mean by that is that we can talk all day, all night about the kind of skills that you want in a team, but I'm highlighting this thoroughness as a critical part. Along some key things like critical thinking and all that kind of stuff. But the point here is that I've learned that at least within my context, and I'm sure this is applicable anywhere, and even outside of AI, by the way, but very much so specifically for AI, is that sometimes the small details and insights can be the most important ones, and they sometimes give you these eureka moments, right? And so when you are expecting your team to build, and you're expecting that things might go smoothly, or things may not go so well as they experience challenges, the best thing that you can do, given that you're building something real that actually somebody is paying for, is that if you want to pivot, if you want to change a requirement, if you have a serious finding, if you have any sort of key insight, you've got to come with you've got to come at it with evidence, right? So I always promote the evidence-based approach to solving problems, or bringing forth any sort of ideas and that type of stuff, to a reasonable extent, of course. But this has been very important for us because I actually have a very large team that is doing multiple different use cases at the same time, and so making sure that we have the right skill set and the right mindset within these teams has made my job much easier, because now they've kind of come to know what to expect in terms of, okay, you want to communicate this, you've got to come with the details, the right level of detail, and you've got to present that evidence in a very compelling way for us to make a change, to propose a different idea or a different approach. That said, when we talked about critical thinking and we talked about attention to detail and that type of stuff, it's critical that as you build that strong team, that you expect and you encourage that they come back to you with feedback and ideas for improving how you're approaching problems, feedback for improving one of the many processes that we have, even ideas for, what, I think our methodology would be better, or our governance structure would be better if we did, A, B, and C. As I mentioned a few minutes ago at the very beginning, I don't think that anyone really has figured out this whole AI game from end to end, right? And it's through that strong team that you encourage to bring forth these good ideas that you are going to get better. And so the other part of it is, like, you don't necessarily want to have every single person who's like, an exact copy of each other. So you've got to also seek some diversity of thought and experience and hold that as a strength. Because if everybody's kind of the same template of a person, even if everybody's got to have that attention to detail, but you kind of still have to diversify people, left brain, right brain thinkers, people who are a little bit more creative, people who are more on the project management that has been my strongest teams are the ones who are the most diverse. The other thing that has been very critical in making our team successful is reminding everyone and encouraging people to look for these opportunities, what I call here simplicity wins, right? So sometimes when you have been working for all day and you still got that one last problem that you've got to solve, right? Sometimes we tend to maybe overthink things a little bit, or go down rabbit holes, and that's got to be avoided. And so you've got to promote that idea of seeking simplicity when possible within the team. And I have a story here about within one of my teams. We went through this whole use case assessment. We've broken down a problem. Okay, here's the problem. Here are the parameters of the problem, and here's where we want to get to in the end. And it was all good. Everybody agreed. Everybody was on the same page. And we started, and a week goes by, and I'm not really hearing much from that team, which I guess in some way, no news is good news. But then this BA comes back and says, okay, look, I respect the process. I respect that you guys have broken down the problem in a certain way, but I've actually done some analysis. I've actually looked at, I think it was a few hundred, 200, 300 images. I've analyzed that object that we're trying to evaluate whether it's defective or not. And let me tell you that you guys really overcomplicating this, right? Here's the data about what I've noticed. He's coming back with percentages and segments of the data that look a certain way versus not, right? And he's like, I propose that we solve this problem in this way instead. And at first I'm like, dude, like, we went through this whole process already, like, but I listened, and he was 100% right. So it was very much worth it at this point to go back to the client and say, hey, here's an opportunity for simplifying things, and I think we should do it for the following reasons, as per the data that I'm about to show you. And And it actually allowed us to shave off a couple of weeks off of the timeline, which was really good. We always look for these types of wins, and it's all coming back to all these things, right? So having the attention to detail, being analytical, being evidence-based, not being afraid to say, hey, I have perhaps a better way to do this.
I love it. I love it very much. So just jump in with a question here. So let's just say you're starting a project, okay? And you've been given the opportunity to, build the team from scratch. So who is the first person you're bringing onto the team? And, what is that person like to, as call it, the first person, the founding person? Tell me about that person.
So that person, and maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a business background type of guy, but I would look for someone who is business oriented. And again, remember that this is all within the context of an actual project that somebody is paying for and is really expecting outcomes. So I would look for a strong BA, someone who has a diverse set of experiences, or someone who doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience, but is showing this ability to think critically, someone who's excited about AI, someone who has done a little bit of homework, understands the basic tenets of data science, understands the basic tenets of machine learning, and someone who's not afraid to get their hands dirty in terms of doing some of the tedious work, because sometimes it gets pretty tedious. And if you don't have that tenacity and willingness to get down into the dirty details and be able to lead a team, which is the other thing, your chances of success take a serious hit. So I think it would be that person. Obviously, that person is not going to succeed on their own. So I can talk a lot more about the type of data scientists and machine learning engineers that I look after and that type of stuff as part of that holistic approach to solving problems.
What kind of makes leadership of AI teams such a rare thing? And in that case, why is AI leadership so different?
I think it's different because you kind of have to be a bit of a trail blazer. There aren't a ton of back to the whole idea of explicit knowledge, right? There isn't a ton of here's how you solve that problem. Here's how somebody else or a ton of people have solved it before. So, being okay with that type of risk and uncertainty, but also the pressures of performing and coming back with good results, I think it's a bit more rare than when you look at undertaking different types of work when it comes to tech, where there's a little bit more availability of references and stories, and somebody who's done this type of thing before. So you've got to be ready to kind of figure it out on your own, and be very resourceful, and talk to this person, get the knowledge that you need from the developer, get the knowledge that or from the architect, get the knowledge that you need from the machine learning engineer, the data scientist, etc. You have to be very curious.
I love it. I love it. And I kind of know where the next series of slides are. So I think it's a good spot to just kind of keep going. And
Sure.
Maybe I'll jump in with another question in a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so the fifth element or success factor is communicating effectively in all directions. And I mentioned this a little bit before, so we'll dive a little deeper. AI is one of those things where there's a ton of academic material out there that talks about the latest and greatest ways to solve problems, but also the business concepts, the business context within which it's applied also vary quite a bit, and it can be very challenging to be that person that can play at both ends. And so when it comes to communicating as part of the regular cadence and the governance structure and the methodology and talking to different people, you have to sort of strike the right balance between referring to those academic concepts, but also the business concepts. So this is going to be very critical when you're explaining a particular challenge that you're coming through, or raising a particular risk, or setting expectations with the teams that you're working with or the client that you're working with. And also, very importantly, as you establish trust, right? I think it's a space where, given the hype and that sort of stuff, I think there's a lot of things that can be said, and maybe a little bit of room for exaggerating, and talking about AI as the be all and end all of solving all kinds of problems, and and that doesn't really serve you at the end of the day. So you've got to strike that right balance, and as you're doing that, you've got to simplify where you can. So you've got to use the right type of language based on who you're talking to and in what setting, right? Sometimes I'll use an analogy to explain a problem to my client where otherwise I would have to use very technical terms, and that doesn't really get me anywhere, right? So it's all about balancing that, using simple language. And ultimately, this is how you're going to maintain your credibility, right? As a leader, someone who's going to be leading that type of work with its inherent risks and that type of stuff, you always have to be mindful of your credibility and the perception or how people perceive you as someone who's driving that work. The other thing that I've learned, and I kind of preach within my project, is and really within my organization. Again, I think this is one of those things where it's not AI specific. This can be your philosophy for doing any kind of work, but try to eliminate as much as possible the opportunities for people to misinterpret or misunderstand what you're saying. And it could be simple as you're sitting down in a workshop or something, and you're talking about so many different things, and people are just throwing words like it and that, and it didn't work. It's like, okay, like, what are you talking about? Which aspect of things are you really talking about, right? Because if I'm, not really paying attention, or, I get distracted or something, and I misunderstand what you're saying, and then, we think we have agreement on an approach, and then it comes a week later, it's like, oh, I thought you were talking about this. Oh no, actually, I was talking about something completely different, and you misunderstood me because maybe I wasn't clear enough. And I think that within AI, that can have, at least from the work that I'm doing, it can have some pretty serious implications, because again, it's like you're working within a project with timelines, with certain forecasted costs and benefits and that type of stuff. So, and there's all these perceptions about, well, how is AI really going to work? Is it not going to work? So eliminating that opportunity for misinterpretation is critical. And then finally, in regards to that, the diagram that I kind of created at the bottom there, and this is maybe just my thinking, the way that I think, but to me, everything is a spectrum, right? So when you look at any type of work that you're doing, especially AI, there's just so much deep level detail. And then as you move along the spectrum, people think differently about the work and have a different kind of big picture, high level perception of what it is, right? So if you look at that spectrum, you have your developers, your data scientists, your business analysts, very deep into the detail. You have your executives, project managers, advisors, etc., who are more looking at things at a big picture level. As a product manager, I kind of find myself in the middle, and actually that's what keeps me excited, because I can go in either direction. But one of the things that I learned is that I really have to tailor the way that I communicate with people, whether it's my team members or my client or my project executive or the developer. Really have to understand who it is that I'm talking with, what do they care about, what kind of detail do they want to hear versus don't want to hear, and play accordingly. Number 6. This one is really interesting, for me anyways. And it's the idea of expecting to evolve with the project. As a consultant, one of the things that I've had to do is not only evolve in terms of my understanding of how to apply AI within the particular industry or a particular client scenario, but also learn the industry-specific language and some of the external and internal contexts that do matter. So, without talking about too many details, yes, I did have to learn about regulatory compliance issues that are, the bread and butter of my client, right? And so, you can't really remove yourself from that type of thing if you expect to be successful and if you expect to be, that trustable, incredible partner that is really going to be indispensable to the project and to your client. So you've got to expect change is inevitable. You've got to be agile enough to adapt to it, and it's always going to push you outside of your comfort zone. And I have a story here about I mentioned the use case assessment a few times now, and even that has evolved over time. So there was an original template, and we used it quite a few times. It did a great job, and then I got a request from the client to say, hey, would you mind adding the confusion matrix that is expected in the deliverable into your use case assessment? And I kind of found the ask to be somewhat odd, because I thought that the confusion matrix is more so an output thing and not necessarily about how to assess a use case. To me, assessing a use case was about, okay, let's actually dive into the problem and define it very clearly. So I said, okay, yeah, sure, we can do that. And I thought it was a pretty low value thing that may not necessarily be the best use of my time. But as I started incorporating that into my outputs, I actually started looking at it very differently, and I started seeing the value, because it kind of forces you to think about, at the end of the day, what do I want that pipeline of models and functions, and really the solution, which is a combination of AI and non-AI elements, what is it going to give me at the end of the day? So actually putting that within the use case assessment forces you to think a little bit longer term and set the expectations about what is going to actually be integrated into the business process at the end of the day. So funny enough, I actually, now when I do these use case assessments, or when I'm working with my teams on them, I actually start with that first, which is, to me, it's like, wow, I looked at this when the ask came as like, okay, I don't see the value in this, but now I really do. So being able to evolve and try to see the value in those seemingly radical ideas is very, very important.
So I might just ask a quick question at that
Sure,
point right there. So let's just pretend that I'm a product manager. I've been working in product for a really long time, and then I get gifted the opportunity of a lifetime to become an AI project or product manager.
Mm-hmm.
What would be, your initial advice? I go to Ramey. I'm like, Ramey, I've been given this awesome opportunity, but I don't know anything about this. What are the first 3 things that I should learn? And what would your response be to that?
Okay, so you're someone who has experience in product management, but just outside of AI, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's quite a bit of homework that you've got to do, and there's a little bit of kind of introspection and looking at. So you do your homework first, right? And you're looking at computer vision or NLP or whatever the opportunity is, and first of all, you've got to understand it to a reasonable extent, such that you can actually talk about it with various different people of different backgrounds and different job titles, let's say, right? So you've got to be doing your homework enough such that you can have these meaningful conversations with an architect, or with a business person, or with a developer, with a BA, right? And from my experience, this is, for me, it was like, okay, I know my product management pretty well, but now I've got to learn a ton about AI, and I did that through not just doing my homework and reading and watching, YouTube videos and watching this and reading that, but also having these discussions with people who are more subject matter experts within AI, right? So data scientists and those types of personas. And for me, it was about employing kind of similar strategies as when I would otherwise on a typical product management role, where I'm sitting in front of a user, or I'm sitting in front of the some sort of subject matter expert, and I'm asking that data scientist, like, so what is your world like? Like, how do you even go about doing this, right? And leading questions has been a very important thing for me as I started building that AI product manager profile. Sometimes I found that coming in with the right questions has been very good, but also not shying away from playing it back to that person and saying, oh, okay, so you just told me, this and this and this. Do I understand this correctly? And it's through that playing it back that things really get ingrained into my head, or at least from the way that my brain works. And kind of knowing that you don't necessarily know everything, and you're not necessarily going to know everything right away. So that also has an element of, kind of knowing where your limit is going to be, and that you got to really focus on the key areas where you're going to play so that you can be effective as a product manager, or not going down rabbit holes that you don't really need to go down into, right? Like, I understand, for example, that there are different neural network architectures and that they matter depending on the type of problem that that's at hand. But as a product manager, do I really need to know down in the dirty details, how many layers of nodes there is? No, I don't. So you kind of have to manage your time as part of that learning journey, and gauge the types of questions that people want to ask you and expect you to answer, and being very mindful of that. That's what the expectation is, and then going back and doing the homework and incrementally building that knowledge base.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, as AI becomes more and more complex, right? So it's, more layers, more nodes, more parameters to actually analyze. Do you feel like AI is getting harder to get into? Or with the fact that now there's so much more information out there for people to digest and so many more experts, is it getting easier?
I think it's getting easier in some ways, and it's getting harder in some other ways. It's getting easier in the sense that there are more and more people who have gone down certain approaches and certain ways of doing things, and have learned that this is, yes, go down that route, and no, this is don't go down that route, because it's not going to work for that type of problem. So it's getting easier from that sense. But it's getting harder because it's sort of like a science, right? And I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was something that Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about, which is the fact that the more you expand your knowledge within something, the more that you uncover unknowns. So it's getting harder from that perspective, because there's all kinds of material out there about the problems with deploying AI at scale, and it's really only until you get to that that target that you uncover that problem, and then you solve it, and then you get to another problem that you didn't necessarily anticipate, and then you try to solve it. So it's kind of an indirect answer, but it is kind of getting easier in some ways, but then it still pushes you to explore more, to learn more, And I think until a few years from now, or many more years than that from now, until this whole AI game is figured out, I think we're going to see more of that.
I also feel like it might be getting harder as well, and easier in some ways, actually, when I think about it, as I say that, because the client is also increasing its sophistication too, right?
Right.
So the very, very beginning, selling into a certain client might have been a lot easier just because they didn't really know the questions to ask. They didn't have a
That's right.
machine learning process already. So they didn't really have a lot of grounding information that was either going to test you as a consultant or test you as a product team, or like shape the way this thing had to be done. Now with people that are a lot more further ahead, that may have a process and may already have a model that works, that kind of makes you have to raise your game. And I think it gives you guys at IBM a really good advantage in that regard, having this playbook and having all this, like, call it like institutional knowledge that has been baked and tested for time immemorial, pretty much. Like, I can remember when Watson first came out, and it was like testing people on Jeopardy in like 2010. So it's been a while, right? So they've been figuring this out for a while. So good on IBM, and good on you for being part of that journey as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been incredible. It's been a hell of a ride, let's say.
You want to keep going?
Yeah. Okay. Something that I keep hearing more and more about, and I think that even from a regulatory policy perspective, in Canada and outside of Canada, there's more push towards transparency and ethics, and there's all kinds of new things coming out about explainability and what do people expect from AI, and that as a notion on its own has to be recognized if you are going to go out there and really try to initiate change and transformation in business using AI. And one of the things that at the most fundamental level you've got to get real with, and I've had to do that multiple times with my clients, is really explain the fact that narrow AI is not necessarily always that smart, right? And drawing the distinction between narrow AI and general AI. And what we're working with here is narrow AI, at least in my world. And I know there's a ton of research outside of that, but when it comes to building AI in business, it's, I would say 90% or 99% of the time it's narrow AI, which has its limitations. And sometimes I use this water cup analogy, where I can train a machine learning model to be really, really good at looking at this glass of water and telling me if it's full of water or if it's empty. But the reality is that if you show it a bottle of water, or if you show it a mug that has water and you ask it, what do you see? It's going to be like, yeah, I don't know what this is, and it's going to be very limited in its ability to tell you what it's seeing, because the reality is that it doesn't see. It just recognizes patterns and pixels and things like that. And as a product manager, you kind of have somewhat of a choice, right? You're either gonna be very transparent about that, or you're going to say that it's a magic wand and it does whatever you want it to do, right? And I found that the former is a great way to build trust with stakeholders, because then you become on the same page in terms of what are the opportunities, what are the constraints, and how do we play in between those. The other thing about commitment to transparency is that you have to be aware that bias does exist. You should be trying to test for it, and you have to be embedding approaches for resolving it, and that's part of our methodology. And I'm not here to say that I figured out this whole bias game out, and I think it's actually very circumstantial. And in every case, you just, as soon as you have that awareness that bias does exist and it will have some real impacts once this solution, AI solution, goes to production, is when you start uncovering the ways that you can use to resolve it. And it's gonna be different depending on what kind of project that you're doing. But it's, at the end of the day, it's gonna come down to making sure that you have the key things that allow you to have data traceability, that you really understand and are aware of the proportionality of classes or objects or whatever the case may be in the data that you're working with, and being very clear in your model report card or whatever it is that you have, that you are tracking these things, that you are aware of them, and depending on your context, you're going to deal with it in different ways. So what I'm underlining here is the awareness of it and the need to be very diligent in tracking it and viewing this as an important topic. Last but not least, the number 8 success factor is about optimizing the work for where you are on that continuum of AI solution building, right? So we've talked a little bit earlier about the whole hype and people thinking that AI is going to solve all the world problems, and then you start getting into building a POC and then a pilot, and then you're the reality is you're still going to have releases just like with any other type of solution out there, right? You're going to add features, you're going to improve performance. So it's really important to just be aware of what it is really that your objectives are from a business standpoint and optimizing for that. And as part of this, I think what would differentiate AI product owners is the fact that you've got to have a holistic solution mindset. AI is going to be a part, but it's not going to be the whole thing. And that other non-AI part is going to evolve as you move through that continuum. Actually, I need to charge my laptop. Just give me 1 second, okay?
Nice.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. Get it plugged in. So I'm checking in the questions in the chat here, and I do think that there's some good stuff in here. So Brian, I really love your question, and I think when Ramey gets back in a second or so, we'll get into it. So far, like, I feel like the things that I've really taken away from this conversation are largely related to like I really liked what Ramey was saying about the team and the diverse nature of it. As YouTubers, if you can put it in the comments so you can hear us, that would be awesome. So the question is from Brian. What he says is, as AI and ML are in continuous research, okay, and there's always new knowledge being brought into the picture when you're developing this kind of a solution, and specifically with respect to like vision problems and edge AI, like to what extent does this call it constantly changing knowledge base actually factor into your development process?
It factors in quite a bit. So as part of the governance structure, we have what we call, I guess, disciplines within the team. And data science, the data science discipline is a critical, is a critical one of those. And part of that discipline is this sub area or sub team. Some individuals who are doing these little side POCs and little things on the side based on the latest research paper that talks about I don't know, extracting text out of a document or things of that nature. So we've got actual work going on the side to get us ready for those more complicated problems that we anticipate seeing. So this is very much related to like the kind of project that we're doing and what we anticipate coming, and also based on my conversation with the client. And we have a whole backlog of use cases, right? And we look at that backlog and we say, okay, well, we know that use case is coming. Maybe we should just do a little bit of research on that. I also have data science leads who are, that's their discipline, that's their education, and that's their calling, if you will, right? And they know that if they don't read the latest and greatest, if they are not involved in these communities and inherently pushing themselves and actually do enjoy pushing themselves to learning the second thing, then very quickly they might end up becoming irrelevant in the space. So it's something that we've been able to embed in our governance structure and in our methodology. And it is very closely tied to understanding the types of problems that are coming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I feel like in this kind of an environment, you also have to have a way of rapidly assessing the quality of these POCs. So, by baselining what you've got in your existing pipeline and having a really firm understanding of its, ability to deliver value, it should be pretty clear. Okay, if I just compare, Apple versus Apple, or existing versus POC, am I actually adding value? In certain cases, maybe I can bolt this onto the pipeline, or maybe this is such a transformational change that it's actually really valuable to bring it in, and maybe even supplant something else. I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. You were gonna add something on that?
And I think this is where some of that tacit knowledge comes into play, right? So having done a few things explicitly or followed some explicit, instructions for doing something or using specific model and learning the intricacies of it, then you become better at being able to call it a little bit sooner than after everything is said and done. And unfortunately, you have, not the results that you want to have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we're getting, I think, closer to the end, and I have a couple of more like open-ended questions.
Okay.
And maybe this will give people from the chat a little bit more time to, ask that question you've always died to ask somebody that's talking about enterprise AI. Can you remember the first time that AI seriously impressed you?
I do. I think it goes back to this Watson at Jeopardy thing. And I was very fascinated because I think within the realm of my own understanding, I was just like, this just sounds impossible. Like, how does a machine beat a person in terms of the amount of knowledge that they've gathered and the way that they answer questions? I found that to be, it's almost like I didn't really believe it at first, and I thought that, hey, is this really what happened? And I dug a little bit into it, and I started understanding the basics of how that was done, and I was super impressed.
Yeah, I can remember. It was the International Complex Systems Conference, I think it was, in 2011. The guy who was part of it, just like actually built it, was giving the talk on it and was talking about how they had to do it because they couldn't actually transmit the information over the network fast enough. So they had to have like a shipping container full of like Wikipedia, and all the compute was housed in a shipping container behind the set. So things were pretty much happening locally, going back and forth from it. And I was so blown away. I can remember being like, "Wow, that's insane." But like I also find that now more than ever, I'm really blown away by GANs, so things that are generating things, and like the creativity of AI is something that's just blowing my mind all the time. I keep showing like anybody who asks like what I've seen, like the open AI jukebox that like makes music. I I can't believe it. It's like one of those things I'm
Yeah.
like, I can't, like, forget about, people having jobs in music in, a couple of years. Like, you're gonna have a really big problem.
Yeah.
But like this is, I think, the frontier that we find ourselves on. And I feel like it's really, really powerful to be, on the AI and product side of things. Because yes, I think the technology itself blows our minds all the time, but also being able to turn it into something that's valuable is even more powerful in a way,
Yeah.
because it means that somebody's actually able to take advantage of this transformational technology. I have another ended question from Brian. So take this however you will here.
Okay.
So, how do you deal with the lack of policy with respect to AI? Like right now, I don't feel like, and it's actually a really good challenge that governments and organizations of all shapes and sizes have. It's like it's so new and it's so disruptive that there isn't really a whole bunch of rules, a whole bunch of stuff around it that's keeping it contained in a way. And we're almost likely to be surprised by something before we have a rule around it. So
Mhm.
give us a stream of thought around that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and I think you are right. There isn't really a ton of policy around it, and I think that it's almost like it's too difficult to come out with policy um, that is proactive enough to try to address potential problems that AI can be the cause of. I'll bring the example of facial recognition, right? And that's an area where I don't play, and then there are a number of key technology players like Microsoft and Amazon and IBM who have come out and said, yeah, we're not really gonna play in that field. When you look at that and you think, okay, well, like, how did that happen? Well, what happened was that measure was very much reactive, right? We started seeing bias in facial recognition, and then people started, taking action. So it's certainly a challenging thing to operate um, within a world where there isn't a ton of policy and a ton of rules, and it's almost like it carries a certain element of risk that is kind of hard to quantify because you can't really look at your crystal ball and see what kind of policy is going to come in the future. So um, for me, I try as much as possible, and this is actually very difficult, to try to think through and forecast the types of issues that we may run into, from an ethical perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and try at least to highlight some of those things, maybe socialize them a little bit, and see if we need to take action now or if we just have to see what happens. Um, I I've had it sort of as a stretch goal to one way or another. I haven't really defined exactly how, but I'd like to be a part of being being a part of helping to define these things in the future. I know there are multiple ethics boards and things kind of happening in the background. We're seeing that in Canada recently with some regulations that just came out very recently around how to protect people against decisions being made by AI, and the requirement to explain how that decision was made and that kind of stuff. It's one of those goals that I have, and I'd like to be more involved on that front. But some of it is just the awareness of that this type of issue does exist, and that to the best of your ability, you've got to be able to forecast it.
I like what Brian said here is like there's a good way of getting involved, which is to join some think tanks.
Okay.
And Brian, if you had any resources and you could just drop them in the chat, we'll be able to uh, get either connected to those groups or just do the more research and figure out what they're seeing and maybe inform our own approaches. Something that really kind of caught me a little while ago, because we've been doing a bit of research into explainability, and kind of getting a good feel for the broader implications of explainability in AI. And there was actually a really forward-looking paper by Intel,
Okay.
um, that said something to the effect, it was like, these are the challenges of explainability. And then there was this one bullet that I was like, oh wow. It was, there's definitely going to come a time when it exceeds our ability to understand it,
Okay.
because it's just so it's taking in 175 billion parameters. It's doing something amazing with the information, and it gets it right in a way that we can't understand anymore.
Hmm.
And that kind of shook me for like a bit there. I was like, we've always had this like human centric view of us being supreme.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see them, just say, hey, there's going to come a day when this thing is obviously better and impossibly better, that our own rules don't really apply anymore. And I think we're also seeing that in computer vision, right?
Absolutely.
Like object detection is, I wouldn't say solved, but it's gotten to a point where it's pretty impressive, and it's only going to get better. Like, I guess I'm gonna try to shape this into a question. So, like, with respect to computer vision, like, what does impressively great computer vision actually do that is completely different, or maybe is advanced compared to where we are today?
Um, so first, I want to comment on something that you triggered in my thought process a few minutes back when you were talking about GANs, and I think it's very relevant here. And I'll get to your question, but I was reading an article before about GANs, where it was fascinating to see that there were pictures that were being used for testing and training that humans can actually interpret, right? So it could be, I don't know, a picture of a hand or a picture of a mouse or, a laptop or whatever, right? And it's so easy for us to, like, in nanoseconds understand, yeah, I know what I'm looking at, right? And then you saw, and the paper was talking about how there were these images that were artificially created using these GANs. And you look at these pictures and it's just a bunch of pixels that are black and white, right? And it was talking about how you can actually achieve the same accuracy results by training on those pictures, the ones that are not interpretable by the human eyes. So I thought that was really fascinating, that it could really get beyond us so much, that, not only is this the black box of the neural network and what it's doing, but it could also work in ways that we can't even understand right now.
Hmm. It's kind of, I wouldn't say it's scary, because like I think and maybe this is bad, I've lost my fear of AI, and now it's just respect and like impressed all the time. And being part of ACE, like the AI.science community, really helps me appreciate that, because I find that it's a really good way of staying on the frontier of what's interesting and having conversations like this with you, that like we don't allows you to get exposed to things sooner so that you can digest them differently than you would if you saw them on TV, right? Because it's all
Yeah.
about sensationalism there, right? Where it's all about, let's impress you and scare you and create an emotional reaction. Whereas in this kind of a community, you get exposed to the stuff in a way that it makes you go, okay, I can see what the implications are, because it's not about fear mongering. It's not about um, taking a political position on something. Um, and I guess this might be a good place to end. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So Ramey, I might just put it back to you. It's like, is there any like closing thought or closing idea that you've got, either as part of our discussion or as part of something else that you think that would be good for the wide world to kind of hear on this kind of topic, or maybe anything else you're thinking about?
No, I would like to close by saying that, first of all, I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. So thank you for having me. And I'll close with just a thought that keeps coming up again and again on various instances, which is that the AI world is still being figured out, right? There are successes and there's challenges across all kinds of different industries where it's being applied. And I think that it's only going to take us to the next step. So as long as we continue to communicate, continue to share knowledge, continue to provide platforms for people to share their learnings very effectively. And so it's becoming a little bit more difficult in the current world that we're living in, where things are a little bit more, people are not going out as much and having these AI meetups and stuff like that. And again, back to my point about appreciating being a part of this. So I look forward to any opportunity with speaking to anyone in the audience who enjoyed the talk and wants to connect further. So please feel free to connect. And Ashley, once again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ramey. Thank you very, very much, and thank you very much to all the viewers. And your time here was hopefully very, very valuably spent. And I'm hoping that you join us for the next one. And Ramey, I'd love to have you back. So
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for joining, and definitely feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I'll drop your thing into the chat here, and we'll take the conversation onto that channel. So thank you very much, everyone. Hope everybody has a great time and stay safe.
Thank you.
Safe.
Stay safe, everyone.
See ya.